All right, we're a minute past the hour and we're ready to get started. Welcome everybody to the webinar. Today's webinar is Mobile Device Archiving Within Your Organization. My name is Sheldon Mills. I'm a Marketing Manager here at Guava, and I'm here with Q Mangus, the Director of Product Marketing here at Guava. Just wanted to start off by thanking everyone for attending the webinar. And we're going to have a Q&A style session today, addressing all the frequent questions we get regarding mobile archiving, best practices, and then how Retain can help with that. I'll be filling the questions, and Q will be answering them. We have a number of frequently asked questions that we get all the time. However, if you have any questions in this webinar, please put them in the Q&A panel or the chat panel, and Q will be sure to address those. Those are our most important questions. So please ask if you have anything that we haven't addressed or you're just dying to know. Q.
Thanks everyone for being here. We're really excited to bring you this presentation and talk to you about mobile archiving in the workplace and some things that you're probably seeing, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions about what you're seeing today. And yeah, happy to be here and to present today.
Thanks, Q. So I guess with that, let's just jump right into it. First question, we get this all the time, is why do I need to archive mobile communications? What are the reasons? Give us the background on why that's necessary.
Perfect. Great question. As Sheldon said, a lot of people ask us this. This is brought up a lot. And some of these things are probably going to be fairly obvious to you because I would imagine that you've dealt with this in your organization. But I do want to go over them and just really hit hard the reasons why you should be archiving mobile. Here's just a few little stats that you'll see here on the screen, some things that we've done some research here. Once again, these things are probably pretty obvious that global traffic for mobile devices has increased 13-fold in the last few years. There's a lot of people are using smartphones. They're being used at work, and so I would imagine that you see this in your organization, that you have employees that are using smartphones, maybe all of them. You probably may even have something closer to 90 or 100%. Mobile traffic increased recently. There's an increase in mobile traffic every year. And the idea and the purpose of this slide here is to just let you know that mobile is here to stay. It's grown a ton, and it will continue to grow. Another interesting one that I really like to share, it's a cool one here, is that in 2011, and I would imagine it's a 5-year-old stat, but it's still very true today, is that there was 7.8 trillion texts sent worldwide. That's about 250,000 texts per second. So there's text messages going on like mad. So every second that we've been talking, think of how many text messages that have been sent. So that's a clear way in which people like to communicate, and especially for younger workers, right? That they're for sure communicating via text messages. So think about this for a minute. If you want to put this into perspective, think about how many text messages you send daily. I would imagine it's probably a few, but then think about how many text messages your kids or people of that younger age send, in that teenage group, right? How many do they send? They send tons, right? And it's amazing how many messages are put forth on mobile devices. So that's something that we really need to get a handle on. I'm going to give you a few more stats here just to take note. If you looking backward, this is really interesting to look and see how many smartphones were sold and to see the growth of that. And so, of course, this is going to continue to grow, and you can see this trend. It will probably level out a little bit as more and more people have phones and aren't necessarily replacing them. But the idea is that these phones are coming into your organization, and once again, here's another slide to just reinforce that there is smartphone penetration. That if you're not seeing employees bringing devices into your organization, you will be. And so you need to be thinking about how you're going to manage that. And so the idea and coming back to the question is, why should we be archiving? The answer is because everyone's using phones. Everyone's using smartphones, and those smartphones can be great for collaboration. They can be great for productivity, but they can also bring threats. Right? There's threats of malware. There's threats of viruses entering your organization. But I think the biggest threat is really end users communicating things that they shouldn't be, sharing information that can cause your organization problems. And so the idea is you need to now ensure that you have a way to have oversight of those communications, whether that's their text messages, their phone call logs, even voice recordings. You need to have oversight of that. So if and when you're involved in some sort of litigation or legal action, that you can be prepared for that. Plus, there's an idea of protecting your employees, right? So by having oversight of what's going on a mobile device, you can ensure that your employees communicate what they should be communicating and are using it in a good way, but are not sending things that could damage your company, that could maybe confidential or sensitive information. And if you're in a regulated industry, things that would violate policy, so say financial, and I know we'll probably touch on this in a little bit, but say if you're in a financial organization, they shouldn't be giving trade tips and stock tips and those kind of things over a mobile device, and so you need to make sure that you have oversight on that. So that's the idea. So the two reasons why you should be archiving is, number one, mobile devices are everywhere. Number two, you need to have that oversight to protect your organization and your employees.
Awesome. Actually, we'll get into regulations here in a minute, but it reminded me, back in December, the federal rules of civil procedure changed so that mobile communication and social media have the same weight, for litigation, stuff like that, as, say, email. So, in essence, mobile is becoming more important in terms of that actionable data that could be litigated against. That brings me.
Absolutely. Yeah, those kind of electronic communications are being viewed the same as email was in the past, and so yeah, that's something to really have that oversight on is all of your electronic communication.
Right. Another question, I guess, right after that we get all the time. Explain the why. People want to know what type of mobile data should be archived.
Perfect. Yeah, we talked about the why and the what should be archived. You really should be archiving. Let's see. I'm looking if I have a slide here. I don't see which one. Well, we'll just get into it. So, what should you be archiving? You need to be archiving. I kind of touched on that a little bit, but you need to be archiving the mobile communication. So, text messages, phone call logs, multimedia messages, and even, depending on the organization, even voice calls should be archived. And we'll touch a little bit on how that should work, but you need to be able to archive that kind of communication. And I know we'll hit on this a little bit, but there is a line that's blurred, right? Because what do you do when it comes to people bringing in their own devices, and how do you work with corporate devices? And we'll touch on that, but just know that if it's a business communication on a mobile device, you really need to be archiving that. And you need to find a way to make sure that you can deal with both corporate issue devices, which are becoming less and less prevalent, and BYOD devices that your employees are bringing into the organization and using. But going back to the answer to the question is what it should be: all text messages, multimedia messages, phone call logs, and voice logs. That's what needs to be archived so that you can have oversight.
Awesome. I have a common question, I guess, going back to the regulations queue. A question we get is what regulations could affect what and how my organization archives. And I actually want to put a question out to those on the webinar if they wouldn't mind sharing to put into the chat, whether it's a regulation they're trying to be compliant with, or something from HR or legal. If you wouldn't mind sharing, kind of the impetus to push you guys toward the need to archive mobile.
Perfect. Great question. And yeah, that'd be great if we get some people to give us some info there because we could tailor some answers there. But going back to the regulations, so it all depends on what industry you're in. I know I hit a little bit on financial, but financial has probably the most, right? You have FINRA, which has many statements and regulations that they've come out with stating what and how you should be archiving. And obviously, for years they've been stating that you should be archiving email, but with recent releases of what FINRA has said, they've now covered a lot of social media and then, of course, mobile. And so that's something to really take note of, is that as a financial organization, you really need to be thinking about FINRA. So like specifically, you have FINRA 11-32, and that talks about the tweets and text messages and written material that needs to be preserved. So it's going to hit hard on mobile communication. There's also FINRA 1139, which talks about the idea that you need to retain, retrieve, and supervise business communications, no matter what kind of device how it's conducted, whether that's a work issue device or a personal device. You need to have supervision of business communications. Another one is the SEC. They have a number of rules. There's 17A-3 and 17A-4, and that's all about preserving documents and records for 3 to 6 years. And then the first 2 years, they need to be in an accessible location, readily available. Then, of course, there's NASD. That's about retention programs, Sarbanes-Oxley, a lot of similar things. One thing to really take note of is the Dodd-Frank Act, which is a more recent legislation. That's a huge one, because really the big deal with that one is that you need to be obviously archiving and retaining communication, especially that's related to an executed trade, and it must be stored and held for the duration of the transaction. So you need to make sure to have all communication that is involved with the trade. But here's the kicker with the Dodd-Frank Act: if you do have some sort of a regulatory audit, when the auditor comes in, you have 72 hours to produce the information. So you need to be able to have it archived in a way that you can readily access it and get to it quickly. So that's something to take note of, and remember that with that particular one, you need to be able to quickly get at your information. Some other ones, okay, so if you're in healthcare, you've got HIPAA, and that really has to do with making sure that that all records are maintained. All electronic communication, and mobile is one of those, is maintained to make sure that it doesn't have PHI or personal health information. And if it does, that it was sent through proper and encrypted channels. So once again, you need to make sure that you have that archive to be able to go back and show what has happened if you're ever involved in litigation or regulatory audits. And then high tech actually expands on that and gives a higher level of responsibility for the breach of that PHI. So you need to make sure those particular regulations outline the fact that you need to have that to show that either it was not communicated or that it was communicated in the correct manner. And then for government organizations, if you're a state and local, there's of course plenty of state and local laws that apply to your state. I would encourage you to go out and look and see what is specific to your state. A lot of them are state sunshine laws, really stating that you need to be able to produce communication as public record, and if somebody puts in a Freedom of Information Act request in those state sunshine laws, that you need to be able to produce that. And so you'll need to be able to show quickly what your public employees have been communicating, and if you don't have that archive of the mobile communication, you could get yourself into big trouble. So that's another thing that states what you should be doing is those state and local government. Of course, the federal government has some as well, with obviously the big one, which is the Freedom of Information Act. If people request information, that needs to be readily available and accessible and producible. And of course, there's other regulations that go along with there as well, like the NARA October 2010 Bulletin, Federal Information Security Management Act. Basically, the idea behind all these regulations, to put it in a nutshell, is that you need to retain your mobile communication and you need to be able to readily access it and produce it. And of course, and Sheldon touched on this a little bit, everybody, no matter the organization type, is subject to the federal rules of civil procedure. Basically, the courts are saying, okay, if you are involved in some sort of litigation or legal action, you need to be able to produce relevant communications, relevant documents, and mobile communications are one of them. And so if you are ever involved in litigation, which absolutely can happen, it happens to a lot of organizations, you need to be able to readily and easily access your mobile communication and produce it in case of that, in case of litigation. So that's really a lot of the things that would affect you. I know we went through a lot really quickly. If you want more information, we do have a lot of stuff on our website about this at guava.com, and then I would encourage you to go out and learn more about what exactly applies to you depending on the state as well.
Great. That if anyone wanted to more specifics on a particular industry, there's a lot of information there, and then of course Q could help you out as well. That leads me to our next question, which we get all the time: what to do about BYOD, bring your own device, because statistics are right. A good, Q might have to correct me, a good 70% of organizations allow that for business communications. And so what are the best practices there, and what do you do about that?
Thank you. Great question. I'm going to put in a plug for our blog really quick here. On our blog, we have a post out there that talks about mobile personas and how they help solve BYOD. I'm going to put it in the chat here so everyone can have that. But yes, there is a stat. There's a lot of stats on there about the number of people that are bringing in their own devices, how that affects you, etc. So let me put this in here so that everybody can see. If you want to go out there and check that out, please do. But the idea here with BYOD, I'm going to take this in a couple of ways here. Number one, you need to have policies. So the first and foremost, you need to be able to have an overall policy. So the policy is going to state what employees can communicate when it comes to electronic communication. So that policy needs to apply obviously to email, to social media, and of course, as we're talking today, to mobile. And so your policy needs to outline exactly what they can be saying, how they should be saying it. They need to be clear, and there needs to be training. And these policies, when it comes to BYOD, it needs to explain exactly what you expect of your employees when it comes to BYOD, what they can access, how they can access it. And then, of course, you need to be able to have technology to validate that policy. And that's where the solutions that we have come into play. So with BYOD, of course, there's going to be concerns, right? There's concerns about what your employees are accessing, what they're communicating, what kind of apps you should be giving them, if they should use those devices to communicate with your customers, and then how do you have oversight on that? So really, there's a few ways that you can deal with that, and probably the older school or the draconian approach is to just give them a separate device that your corporation owns, and now you can have complete and full oversight of that device. That's one way to go about it, and it may be something that your organization wants to do, and feel free to do that if that's what you want to do. However, probably something that is becoming much more popular with organizations is to allow your employees to use their own device, but then to have oversight on that. And so there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to have and implement a mobile device management solution or an enterprise mobility management solution, the MDM or an EMM. And with that solution, you can implement things to give you oversight, even on those personal devices. And so what you could do is you can now deploy a set of apps that your employees can use for business. And the one that we would specifically talk about here when it comes to communication would be having a persona, a business persona. And we've partnered with a company called CellTrust to help you to have that separate business persona. So what it does is it's an app that is placed onto the phone, and it works for an iPhone or a Android device. And now that app gives you the ability to communicate via that app for business communication. So what the app does is it assigns a separate business phone number to the phone, and then when the employee, the user, goes into that app, they can text via that app and they can call. And all of those communications are kept separate from their personal communications. So on the iPhone, like iMessage or the text messages that they're using there, the phone call logs that they're using as the native iOS is separate from what is done in this CellTrust app. So now when they need to communicate with business communications, they can go into that app, they can call, they can text, and all that communication is encrypted up until it hits the carrier. So if you're having two users that are using that app inside the organization, it's all encrypted. So as we were talking about with HIPAA, if you're communicating inside your organization and it's going to have personal health information, well, with the CellTrust app, that's okay because it's all encrypted and protected. But what's great about that is that now, once again, is that now that you have that separate app, your employees can call and send things to your employees and to your customers, and you have oversight on those communications. So that now it's separate from the personal, and it's totally business, and then you can archive that in Retain and be able to have oversight on all those communications. So the idea there is that let your employees bring their devices, let them access your network and communicate, but have oversight of that and have policies that outline what they should and should not be doing, and update those policies on a regular basis and make sure that all your employees are trained on it. And then once again, it looks like we put there's a number of blog posts here about what you should be doing with BYOD to kind of supplement what we've talked about here. I encourage you to go out there and check out our blog to learn more.
Great. That leads us right to our next question is, how does Retain work for mobile archiving? Retain is Guelphus. Archiving, well, Q will go into it, all that. And if you had any examples to share with people as well.
Absolutely. So let's go here. Let me talk on a high level of what Retain is, and then I'll talk about the mobile piece in specific. So Retain is an archiving solution, as Sheldon said, that we offer. And Retain archives multi-platform email, social media, instant messaging, web searches, and of course mobile communication. And what's great is we call it unified archiving because all communication, whether that's email, social, search, and mobile, is archived into one central archive. And from that central archive, you can do one search of all electronic communication. It'll come into one central UI to be able to search, and I'll show you that in just a minute here. Then you will be able to perform e-discovery tasks such as, like I said, searching, placing litigation holds, exporting. But the idea here is that there's one solution for all of your electronic communication. You don't have to have a separate solution for email, a separate solution for social media, a separate solution for search, a separate solution for mobile. It's all in one central location. And then let's go here to the next one. Now, specifically about mobile, there's a few ways in which Retain does it. So let me talk high level. Retain archives Android, BlackBerry, and iOS. And I touched a little bit about how it works for iOS in particular, but let's touch on exactly how Retain works for each platform, so for each type of device. So for Android communication, there's two ways in which we can archive. The first and foremost is there's an app that's placed on the phone that will archive all electronic all mobile communication done on that phone. So your text messages, your multimedia messages, so MMS, SMS, and phone call logs are all archived using that app, and it pulls it down and pushes it directly to the Retain archive. For BlackBerry, it's done via, let me finish with Android. For Android, there's also that separate app that I just talked about with CellTrust to be able to have that separate mobile business number and then archive there. So that's available on Android. For BlackBerry, it actually integrates directly with the BlackBerry Enterprise Service. So if you have BlackBerry devices, it will archive all BBM, PIN, SMS, MMS, and phone call logs for those BlackBerry devices, and it's done at the BlackBerry Enterprise Service level, so there's no need for an app on each phone. Okay, and then for iOS, I touched on that a little bit, but iOS, it uses the CellTrust app, which is a separate app that is placed onto the phone, and this app can be deployed using an EMM or an MDM solution and can be pushed out to the phone, and then now it's on that phone, and you can communicate with those mobile and with that mobile business communication number, and it can be archived as well. The great thing there is that there's no need to tether or sync the device. All those business communication, mobile communications are archived. Also, another thing that we have is you can actually archive BBM protected. So that's a separate. If you're not familiar with BBM protected, it's basically an instant message type app that can go onto your phone. It's available for iOS, Android, and BlackBerry, and you can communicate, and all those communications are encrypted. And so when they're communicating via BlackBerry BBM protected, all those communications are encrypted, and then they're archived into Retain. And the nice thing there is that Retain integrates directly with the BBM protected app, so you don't have to deploy like a Bez server or anything like that. You can just have those apps for your employees, and it connects directly to the BBM protected app and archives there. And then one last thing, Retain actually archives voice call logs. We have partnered with a company called Tango Networks, and I'm going to give a plug here. We have a webinar next week where we're going to touch really hard or heavily on how exactly that works and the business case for it and the need for it. So the idea here is that you would deploy the Tango Networks app, and then that would then monitor the voice call logs. It would capture them and convert the voice calls, the mobile calls, into a voice file, a WAV file, and then it's archived into Retain, and it's indexed so that you can search that as well. So if you have that need for that, you can archive those mobile calls as well. Okay, and then let's see. We did talk. Another question was some use cases for that. So let me go down, and I'm going to just show a couple examples of how a couple of organizations used it. So let me see here. Let me go down. I'm going to choose a slide here. So this one of our major companies, it's a Fortune 50 insurance conglomerate. They didn't really want us to mention their name just because for privacy and security issues, but really their situation was that there were some challenges for this insurance company to be able, when it came to texting. They wanted to be able to have the ability to text, right, and be able to have their employees, because they have a large mobile workforce, be able to communicate using text messages to customers and even to other employees. But they were worried about, what's going to happen? How do we have oversight of that? They're obviously regulated with Sarbanes-Oxley and FINRA, and so they knew that they needed to be able to retrieve and monitor and archive those mobile communication, and that they were involved in a lot of e-discovery, being such a large company. So they needed to make sure that they had the ability to have oversight and be able to perform e-discovery. So they chose Retain Mobile to be able to help with their mobile devices. And they have about 17,000 mobile users. And so Retain Mobile is used for their mixed environment. So they have different types of mobile devices ranging from iOS to BlackBerry to Android. And so Retain gives them the ability to archive those communications and then have that oversight. And so if they ever are involved in an e-discovery request, which happens quite often, obviously we can't give details of what has happened, but if they are involved in that, they can then have that archive and be able to have oversight of the mobile communication. And then what's great is that all of those messages are archived, they're time-stamped, the metadata is preserved so that when they go back and look, they can actually see when those text messages happened, who it was sent out to, and how that communication happened. Another example is a Fortune 500 investment company. Not quite as many of their employees are mobile, but they had a particular group of 400 that have mobile devices on a daily basis. Once again, since they are highly regulated, they needed to be able to have that ability to tightly monitor and view what has been going on in the organization. And so in a similar vein, they use Retain Mobile to have oversight of their mobile devices and have that archived in the Retain system to be able to see all SMS, BBM, and PIN messages. Yep, that's great. So yeah, that's the solution for mobile archiving. Of course, as we talked about, it's of the overall solution of Retain. It's one piece of it, and it's all archived into that one central location, giving you that oversight of employee communication on mobile devices.
Great. Q will go into more detail in a minute about Retain and the other things that Retain can do. But before we go to that, we do get a question occasionally if a user has multiple mobile devices, how does Retain handle that?
Great question. So that's probably pretty common where you'll have an employee that has multiple mobile devices and you want to be able to archive that. So the way that Retain does it specifically is the devices are federated based on the employee. So an employee would have a username that Retain would recognize, and then all the devices, no matter how they have, would come back to that employee. So the employee, no matter how many devices they're using to communicate communicate with, whether that's texting or phone call logs, will then be tied to that employee. And so now that employee can browse their own personal archive and can see their mobile messages. They can search them and go back and see what they were communicating personally. And then administrators and other named users can view the entire archive and be able to search all communication, whether that's mobile, email, social, instant messaging, or web searches. And so the mobile communication, no matter how many devices are tied to that user. And then one thing to remember is that Retain is priced by the device. So the number of devices will determine how Retain is priced. So that's the other thing to just remember is that, yes, you can have multiple devices per person and that they're all tied to that user, but there is a cost associated with each device that wants to be archived. Okay.
Awesome. Well, with that, Q, can you go into a little more, and we get this a lot, of how Retain, I guess, is different from other archiving solutions and kind of the overall what can Retain archive?
Perfect. That's a great one. So let's hit on this. Really the big thing with Retain, I wanted to hit on this slide really quick, is the idea about how Retain is different is that it's developed to support compliance, right? You need to be compliant with regulations. You need to be prepared in case of litigation. So you need to have a solution that gives you that oversight. And so what Retain has done, what we've done with Retain, I should say, is given you the ability to have, if you need that, have encrypted communication with mobile devices, have that separate mobile business number, and then be able to have oversight with archiving. And that helps you be compliant. And then, of course, as I touched on before, with these archiving regulations, they touch on mobile communications, but they also touch on email and social media and instant messaging. and web searches. So you need to really, the idea with Retain is to have an overall solution to help you ensure that you're complying with electronic communication regulations. And above and beyond that is to just be able to manage your electronic communication, be able to have the ability to see what's going on in your organization, what your employees are communicating, the tone and feel of your organization, and be able to give your users the ability to search their own archive, be empowered to be able to restore email messages if they need to. But really the idea is, of course, regulation, but also data management. And Retain, in particular, has tools to be able to let you do that. It's one solution for all email, social media, mobile, web searches, instant messaging. It has the tools in place to be able to perform e-discovery, to redact, strike out, to export to PDF, to PST, to export to a standalone archive viewer, which can be a subset of the archive that you can hand off to an external team, and then that external or that subset of the archive can be searched and once again exported again to PDF. It's giving you the ability to really to manage your data and be prepared in case of litigation, in case of a regulatory audit. And then far above and beyond that is to be able to manage your data. So that's where Retain is different, is that it's one solution for all of your electronic communication, and it archives all email, all social media for Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Yammer, and all instant messaging for AOL, IM, Yahoo IM, Link, Skype for Business, and Google Hangouts, and then web searches for Wikipedia, Yahoo, Bing, Google, and YouTube. Oh, which reminds me, I did notice a question in here if there's a webinar specifically about the need for search archiving. We don't have one on the schedule right now. However, we do have some that are about social media in particular, and we do touch a lot on the need for search archiving and why you would want to do that. And we do have a few of those that are recorded, so I can get that over to you as well. So Daniel, thanks for that question. I will get that. I can get that link to you on a past webinar that we've had about the need for archiving social media, and it touches on instant messaging and web search in there as well. Sorry, I just noticed that as we were talking about web searches, thought I'd bring that up. So yes, that is how Retain is different than other archiving solutions, is it gives you the ability to archive all electronic communication in one central archive, and it gives you that oversight of course, mobile communication in that one central location.
Right. A question we get a lot, because the archive is so integral to compliance and litigation, is how does Retain help with e-discovery?
Yes, perfect. With e-discovery in particular, the idea is if an e-discovery request comes into play and you need to be able to be ready for that, you need to be able to quickly search the archive. So number one, there are powerful search tools. Let me show you. I think I have one here. Okay, 17. It's slide 17. Hold on one second. So Retain gives you a powerful search tool. And so with this search tool, what's great about it is that we like to call it a Google-like search or an auto-suggest type search. So as you start to type in a search, it's going to give you suggestions of results. So in this one, was typing in test, right? And you're going to be able to see, okay, here's some things that are in the archive that have to do with test. And what it's doing is it's actually searching different parts of the archive. It's going so deep as to search the subject, the body, the recipient, the domain, attachment names, and it will even go so far as to the attachments. It will actually search the content of that attachment. So say that's a Word doc or a PDF, it'll go that deep into searching. It will search text messages, MMS, phone call logs. I talked about the voice recordings. It's going to search the metadata of that, so voice call logs would come in as well. And so when you do a search, it's going to be one search for all your communication. You don't have to know what that is. You don't have to know who the sender is. You're going to do one search and it's going to pull in those results. And it's going to give you suggestions. Also, the search terms are highlighted, making it that much easier to see what you're searching. You can limit as well what you want to see. So if you were to expand on the left side here, the scope, you'd be able to view and limit and drill down into what particular message you're looking for. So if you know you want to find a text message, you could limit it to that kind of message. And so that's really one of the ways in which it helps. The biggest way that it helps is that it gives you that search tool that an administrator can search the entire archive, an auditor or legal team can search that entire archive and be prepared in case of an e-discovery request to quickly and easily access the information that needs to be accessed. Then that search results and the pertinent messages can be exported to a PDF and now you're prepared for court, for litigation, for whatever that e-discovery request is for. It can also be exported to a standalone archive viewer, or we like to call it the publisher. And so what that viewer is I could take that search that I just did, I can export it to the publisher. That publisher can be placed on a jump drive or a DVD or other portable media uploaded to, say, Dropbox or another file sharing site, and then handed off or sent to an outside team. And now that team can search that archive, that subset, without ever having to access your entire archive. And from that publisher, they can search again, they can export further to PDF, and they can also redact and strike out, which is essential for an e-discovery request to make sure that personal information or information not relevant to a case is taken from the record and is not made part of that request. And then, of course, there's litigation holds that you can place, legal holds that you can place on messages so that they can't be taken off of the archive, even if it meets the policy requirements that you've put in. So say you have your policies that you archive things for 3 years, and at the 3 years, Retain will automatically delete those messages. Well, if there's a litigation hold on those, it will not. You can also place message tags. Let's see here. I'm going to go back here. So up along the top, kind of hard to see, but just so you know, there's where the legal holds are. You can place them in a confidential state. You can place confidential tags or other tags. So if you want to group messages and be able to have a tag on that message, you easily can, and then you can go back and search that tag. And then, of course, as I stated, export and forwarding. All great tools for e-discovery, and they're all built in and included in Retain.
All right, Retain. E-discovery tools are pretty powerful. A lot of people like that about Retain. This is the last question. Unless anybody has more, please put those in the chat or the Q&A. What does Retain cost, and is it worth it?
Great question. So the pricing, I touched a little bit on the pricing. Let me go. I'm going to go here. I thought I had another one. Hold on one second here. So I'm just putting that up so that you can see it if you want to go see more about Retain. Just thought I'd have that up there as we're talking about this. So the cost of Retain is it's priced per user when it comes to the email. So let me back up a little bit. There's a base cost for Retain. There's a server cost, and then that's priced per user, and that gives you Retain plus the Retain email archiving piece, and that's the base cost. And then if you want to add on the mobile piece, as we talked about mobile, that's priced per device, and that's an add-on module. It's a nominal fee over the base price of the server. And there's two pricing models. There's one if you want to deploy this as an on-prem solution, and then there's one if you want to deploy it in the cloud. And those models are different. But yeah, so it's priced per user and per device, and the pricing depends on your organization, the number of users. There's volume discounts and whatnot. So I can't give the price exactly on this webinar, but if you would like a price quote, feel free to visit us at guava.com/quote, and you'll be able to get a price quote for for retain and see how much it will cost for your organization. But the follow-up to that is the cost worth it? Absolutely. Right? The idea here is that you have retain to be able to give you the ability to quickly and easily access your communication and have oversight of that. So you're going to be able to increase your employee productivity. That's a cost that's hard to quantify, but that's going to save you money right there. They're not going to have to spend so much time trying to find messages. They can quickly and easily find it in the retain archive. You're going to free up your IT's time because how many times are you bogged down with requests to find a message? Your IT department, your users can now find that themselves. It's going to reduce your e-discovery costs and your legal costs. Think of how much that costs you. How much does a lawyer charge you per hour to be able to find messages, right? And so if you have them in your archive and you can easily get to them with retain, with the e-discovery tools that are built in, that's going to save you money there. And then, of course, if you're ever involved in a regulatory audit or litigation, this solution will be invaluable to you to be able to produce those communications. And heck, you might win the case. I had a person actually come to me at one of our events and say to me, he goes, we keep losing these cases because we don't have an archive and we can't prove our side. So you'll be able to prove your side of it. Because imagine if you're sitting at that table, you're involved in litigation, and the person on the other side of that table has the information and you don't. Think of the disadvantage that would be, and so it's imperative to have an archive, and the retain archive solution is a great one for you to use. And then I was going to look here. It looks like there's some questions. How do you integrate with EMM? So I kind of touched on that. So with EMM solutions or MDM solutions, the integration is that you can deploy either the retain app if you want to archive everything on the phone when we're talking about Android. And then, of course, a big EMM solution is BlackBerry Enterprise Service. So we integrate directly with the BlackBerry Enterprise Service to be able to archive all BlackBerry messages. And then also with EMM solutions, you could deploy the app, the CellTrust app, onto the phones to be able to have that separate mobile business done. And then the other one is, what about call archiving? I think I touched on that. So yes, mobile calls are archived in retain. Actually, the voice recording is something that will be archived in retain. Let's see if there's any other ones. Just looking through here. Okay, that looks like all the questions I can see in the chat. If you have any others, feel free to put those through. But once again, there's our contact information if you want to reach out to us, and we can provide you further information.
Great. Just wanted to thank everybody for their time and participation today. Again, please, if you want a demo or a quote, go check those out. Just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and everyone on the webinar will receive a link to that recording. So look for that email. Also, again, I encourage everyone to visit our YouTube page. That's youtube.com/GuavaTV, and check out any other videos and anything else. Just let us know. We're here to help. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.